Today's class is a very important one. Of course, every class is important, but this one focuses on a particular problem that many non-native speakers of English have. When I'm asking them, and most likely you're one of them, to tell me what happened in a video, that's called reported speech. It's in the same category as reported speech because you're telling me what happened in a video. All right, so you'll say, well, he said this, he said that, he did this, he did that. So the first thing you'll notice is that with reported speech, unless you're giving an exact quote, it's normally said in the past tense, okay? Unfortunately, many people who are not native speakers, they use the present tense too much and usually when they shouldn't. Okay, so we're gonna talk about reported speech today. All right, but it's a long lesson. So I'm going to take it in two parts. All right, I'm going to try to make this first part, shorter than it would be, of course, if I covered everything in the same class at the same time. All right. And also this is Zoom. So, it might even cut off if the recording is too long. And so we want to avoid that, as well as, uploading is harder as well when it's a long video. And you need to be able to digest the information, to learn the information, practice the information, and be very good at it. And so that means giving you, a smaller portion to watch and to learn will be easier for you when it comes to learning that particular lesson. All right, so like I said, I'm talking about reported speech. So let me write the heading for you here. Okay. All right, reported speech. All right. All right. Now, let's talk about this. Okay, because there are certain ways that you have to do this. It's not just one way, but there are many ways, but you just can't do it anyway. It has to be in the proper way. All right, so let's talk about this, starting with, let's see if someone said, for instance, what time is it? Okay. Now that's a question, right? So you're going to say what the person said, right? So let's just put, what time is it? Okay. Now, maybe I can even put it on the same line here, just so you can see. When it becomes reported speech, you're going to say he asked what time it was. All right. He asked what time it was. All right. So he asked what time it was. Okay. You can see here, notice that when you're saying what someone asked, what someone asked, you could say what someone asked, that you're going to hear that, and you're going to hear asked, but you're going to hear asked more than you're going to hear asked in terms of pronunciation. All right. So notice that when you say what someone was asking about, it's not a question at that point because you're reporting what someone was asking about. You're just reporting that information. So you say he asked if you want to talk about the actual pronunciation of asked. He asked what time it was. So do you see how what is there as it is in the beginning? Time is there after what as it is in the beginning. And then is becomes was, okay? And also you're inverting the two, switching the position of the two. So what time it was as opposed to what time is was. No, you're going to say what time it was, So in other words, just remember that one, you're going to put he asked because that's actually what happened. All right. Then you're going to say the question word and whatever the question is. But when you get to the verb to be, all right, remember it is in the present tense is, it becomes was. And remember that it switches places. It is still it because the pronoun is still the same, but it will come first and the verb to be will come second. All right. So, in other words, let me say it the wrong way. Of course, I don't want you to memorize it wrong way, but just so you can not make this mistake. So I don't want you to say he asked, what time was it? Now, I'm not saying that's completely wrong. In certain circumstances, it might actually be said that way. All right. But we're not talking about that right now. We're talking about the first way that it could be said. And I'm going to deal with all of the possibilities. All right. But let's talk about firstly, and there's a reason why you might do this differently as well. So we also need to talk about that. All right. So he asked what time it was. That's the normal way of inverting it when it's reported speech. All right. And like I said, don't worry about right now what you might hear some people say, because we have to talk about whether it's wrong or right. And if it's right, then when is it right and when is it wrong? Because sometimes a thing may be wrong only because of the particular time that is asked or the condition of the sentence that came before it or after it or the situation as a whole. So I don't want to get into too many details right now because I don't want to confuse you. All right. So let's stick to the first way. All right. Let's take it step by step. The first way is just to switch the verb to be with the pronoun. Okay. Because remember, the pronoun is actually the subject if it's a statement, because it's going to be right. It is 2:00, right? So you can see that it is actually the subject of the sentence in the statement. It is 2:00. So what time is it? Someone just says, what time is it? Right? So you can see that's because the question word comes to the beginning. Right. And we dealt with making questions before. This is not the lesson for making questions, but let me just show you. Okay. It is 2:00. Okay. So this is the statement, right? And if you wanted to make this into a question, the first thing that you would do is invert the verb to be, right, with the subject. Right, and say, is it 2:00? Right, that's the first thing you would do when you turn that in the statement into a question. Then, you might say, you might add another question word like, how is it 2:00? Because maybe time went by so fast, you're wondering, well, how in the world could it be 2:00 by now? Now, if you're going to ask what time it is, right? See, and I just used that example as a conditional sentence. I said, if you're going to ask what time it is, see, because in the conditional sentence, I did it that way. All right. Now, then it means that the time should not actually be there in the sentence, because you can't ask about something that's already there. So what happens is here when we have it, is it, this is the unknown. The 2 o'clock becomes the unknown. And when it becomes the unknown, of course, let me put the question mark here. When it becomes the unknown, now I can ask about it, right? And say, what time? Because I'm asking about time, right? And then I put, is it? What time is it? Okay, because I'm asking about time. So I say, what time? All right, what time is it? All right, so just remember, that's just informing questions, just so you'll know that that's where it came from. All right, and so of course, we're talking about here that the person is just saying, reporting what was asked about. Okay, so, all right, so he asked what time it was, and that's not a conditional sentence. So in this case, we inverted the subject, which is it, with the verb to be, which became was, because, this may help you, but it's a rule anyway. When someone said, what time is it? They're actually asking right then. So now when you're reporting about it, that's now in the past. Even if it was a minute ago or a few seconds ago, it's now something that was already asked. So it's now a past action, something that happened already, the asking of what time it is. So that's why when you report it, you're going to say he asked what time it was. That's something that he did before. All right, so just remember that. That's why we changed is to was. And then, we inverted the subject with the verb to be, because actually, again, remember, an original statement, the subject came first and then the verb to be, and we only switched the two when we made it into a question. So it goes back to its normal position, the subject and then the verb to be, when we're just making the statement about what the person asked. Okay, let me give you another example. When do you teach class? Okay, when do you teach class? Okay, so you can see here, just like we did with the first statement, that was a question at the time. So pretend like this is a question at the time as well. When do you teach class? All right, so you can see that what we're going to do now, we're going to say he asked, just like we did the first time. All right, he asked when I taught class. All right, so he asked when I taught class. All right, so notice the pattern so that it becomes something normal for you and regular for you. The first thing we're saying what was asked. All right, and then we're going to come with the question word like we did before. We came with what after asked, but in this case, the question word was when. So we say he asked, and then we put the question word when. Okay, and remember, the word do is usually added, when it becomes a question, because this is also, you need to go back and review how to make questions if you don't realize that do was not originally in the statement, but it came in when we made a question because there was no verb to be in the original statement. Do is for action. When we want to make a statement into an action, we're going to use do, did, or does to change it into a question. All right. So, but you should go back and review the lesson about making questions if you don't remember that. Okay. So, for instance, here, if I say, I teach class at let's keep 2 o'clock again. Okay. I teach class at 2 o'clock. All right. So now when we're going to make this into a question, it's going to be, of course, strange because I'm talking to myself if I say I. So let's go with you just so that we can make it make sense to everyone because you wouldn't be talking to yourself. Okay, you teach class at 2 o'clock. All right, so now I'm going to make it into a question, right? So I'm going to have to use do, like we just talked about. Do you teach class at 2 o'clock? All right, so I made this into a question, right? And so now I can add another question word after I've made it into a question. So do came in there, but it wasn't in there originally, but that's put there in order to make it into a question. All right, so now we can add any question word here. Just say why, for instance, add another question word. Why do you teach class at 2 o'clock? All right. All right, now I couldn't ask about what time at this point, in terms of or when in general time, because I actually said when. All right, so again, it has to become the unknown in order for me to ask about it. All right, because the general when could be talking about what day or talking about what time. All right, but I said specifically what time, so I've eliminated the possibility of asking when, unless I'm saying what day. Maybe it's 2 o'clock, but I don't know what day. So you can only ask about the unknown. All right, so let's say 2 o'clock is the unknown now. Okay. All right, why do you teach class? Okay, and let me put the preposition back at, and I didn't say what time. Okay, now, and since we're going to have a prepositional phrase, I could also still eliminate the preposition so that we can convert it without having an extra word, sitting around, because at 2 o'clock is a prepositional phrase. All right, so that's what at will attach to. So I'll just get rid of it because it's going to attach to the answer. Okay, now, so why do you teach class? All right, I'm going to get rid of why, the question word now, and go back to do. Okay. All right, do you teach class? Now, see, now I'm just asking, do you teach class? All right, which is a normal question. All right, but I can add a question word now. Okay, now that 2 o'clock is not there, I can actually ask when now. Okay. When do you teach class? You see, I can ask that now because I removed 2 o'clock. When do you teach class? All right, now we're back to the original question. When do you teach class? All right, so now we're just going to report it. All right, we're going to report it, to say actually, what was said. All right, because this became the unknown at 2 o'clock or even a day. All right, so now we're going to say, he asked when. Now, of course, it can become I if the you was I. All right, if the you was you, then meaning not me, then it can stay as you. Okay, but it could be he as well, because it depends on who the you is in reference to. All right, so that's important for you to know. When do you teach class? Maybe he's talking to someone else. But typically, if he said you and I'm the one there, then he's talking to me. That's why you becomes I. You becomes I, because in this case, if he's talking directly to me, then when I say what he asked, it will become I. So just remember that if someone's talking directly to you and using you, then you have to switch it to I, because you're reporting to someone about what someone asked you. So it becomes I. So that's very important to remember. If you heard the person talking to someone else, then obviously the you is no longer I. It may become he. He asked when he taught class. So you have to know who the subject is in order to know how to change it. All right, so notice the things that happened here. All right, He asked, that's something that we're putting as we normally do. And then we put the question word, which is when. And then we changed you to I because that's who the you was in reference to. And then teach becomes taught. So remember, it's in the present tense, so it goes to the past tense. All right. That's the normal thing that happens. And then class is there after that. All right, we didn't have the verb to be there, so we didn't have to invert anything. So remember that. The verb to be is not there. We didn't have to switch any words, the position of any words, because remember in the original, when we made the question, we didn't invert any words. But when we use the verb to be, yes, we invert the first two words in order to make it into a question. All right, so just remember that. That's why we didn't have to do that in this case. All right, so let me get rid of this here so we can look at our next example. Okay, so this is very important. When you speak, you need to practice this, and especially when you're writing, that's the easiest way to practice it. But when you're talking, you also have to try to practice this. Many people are not aware of how to, do reported speech. Many of them make many mistakes when it comes to reported speech. I've seen some books for children in Egypt that we're not using the reported speech correctly. And here, these are books that they're giving children to read, maybe in English class or whatever. And the whole book was using the wrong tense for reported speech. All right. So be careful about that. All right. The next example, when does Ali teach class? That was the third example. When does Ali teach class? When does Ali teach class? All right. And this is similar. We're still using the same question word, when. All right. So we're going to go with he asked as well. All right. And just remember, it depends on who Ali is in this case. And maybe I'll just put Mr. Ali so it can be referenced to me. So I can give you an example that is, a real example. All right, so he asks, okay, and what happens here? Remember, does is something, do, does, and did is something that's added. All right, so it's not there in original statement. So it's not going to be there when I in reported speech either, because now I'm making a statement again. I'm not asking a question. All right, so we're going to ignore does and go straight to Mr. Ali. Now, in this case, if Mr. Ali is me, then of course I'm going to have to convert it into me because I'm not calling my own self Mr. Ali. It's going to become me. So you have to be aware of, who is being spoken to. So the person who's reporting the speech will, change the question into reported speech in a proper way. Okay, so Mr. Ali becomes me. All right, and okay. Now there's another thing. There are two ways to change this, but I'll show you both ways. Okay, let me show you both ways. All right, the way that I was talking about now, I'm going to put it down here. He asked me. All right, now, when is the question word. All right, so I have to put that there. All right, and then, the beginning when he asked me, right? That's the difference, because it's to me, I can put that. Now, I don't have to, okay? I could just say he asked, all right? So let me show that one up. Well, maybe I'll put that one. Yeah, I'll put that one down here so you can see three different ways, okay, of actually reporting it. He asked, all right, and then go straight to when. All right, so remember, this is just the beginning, but if I'm the one being spoken to, I can actually put me in there, but I don't have to. Okay, I could go straight to when. All right, in this case, when I okay, because Mr. Ali is me. So in this case, just remember that me is what we call the, the object pronoun. And so if I put it after asked, I'm going to use me. But if I don't, then of course, after when, I'm going to use the subject pronoun I. So he asked when and remember we go to the past tense, when I taught class. Okay, so remember that's one option, right? He asked when I taught class. Now, let's say hypothetically, all right, hypothetically means a situation that could possibly happen, but it hasn't, hypothetically. Let's say Ali or Mr. Ali is not me, all right? All right, then still it can be he asked me because he's talking to me when Mr. Ali, okay, taught class. Okay, that's in the case that he's talking to me about Mr. Ali, but I'm not Mr. Ali. But in the case that I am, you can say he asked when I taught class because, I'm not Mr. Ali. But in the case that, I am, uh, you know, he asked when I taught class. That's when Mr. Ali is me, But if he's asking me, but Mr. Ali is not me, then you have to put him in there. Just remember that. You have to put Mr. Ali in there if he's not you. So he asked me when Mr. Ali taught class. You got that? All right. The Mr. Ali in that case is not me. But who did he ask? He asked me. In the third example, I am actually Mr. Ali. So he asked when I taught class. All right. So just know that difference. Is he talking to me and about me? He asked when I taught class, like that. He asked when I taught class. So he's asking me and about me. All right. So if it's not, then he asked me when Mr. Ali taught class. Okay, this is good to do in this case. If you notice in the third case, I didn't say me, but in the second case, and also in the first case, which I didn't finish yet, it's important to put me so that you know that the me is not Mr. Ali, that they're two different people. He asked me and then Mr. Ali. He asked me when Mr. Ali taught class. All right, so notice that important difference there. Okay. All right, let's see. I was going to show you another. Well, you can, don't worry. If he asked me, okay, it's going to be those two are enough. Okay, even though I could say he asked me when I taught class. That's, kind of like the third one, but you really don't have to do that because if, you can, but you don't have to. All right. So let me just put it as an example. He asked me when I taught class. Okay. So you can do this. You can say he asked me when I taught class. Okay. But you don't need to because you're reporting the speech and you said I. So we understand that. All right. We understand that. So it's really not necessary. It's more necessary for the second version because, I, in this case, is not Mr. Ali. If I'm not Mr. Ali, then he asked me when Mr. Ali taught class is a better clarification of the fact that he's talking to me about someone else. All right. So you really don't have to say he asked me when I taught class. You don't have to, because if you're saying he asked when I taught class, well, we pretty much assume that he is talking to you when you're reporting what he asked because you said I. But it's possible, okay, if someone wants to think of all the possibilities, it could be that I heard him asking someone else about when I taught class. So that's, virtually possible that someone could be talking to someone else, but you heard him asking about you. So in that sense, if you want to clarify that, then adding me would be an important addition. Okay, so just remember you have those three different ways to ask that same, to report about that same question. All right, now Okay. All right, let's take a look at another example. All right. Do you like living in Egypt? Okay. Do you like living in Egypt? Okay, so here's another question. Okay. And let me say, should I just move this up a little bit there? Okay, so you can see here, do you like living in Egypt? Now you have to always, like I said, always pay attention to if you heard this question, is the person talking to you? Did they say, do you like living in Egypt? And they're talking to you? Or were they talking to someone else? So who is the you? Just remember that if it's a real life situation, If it's not, then we have to assume that the you is talking to you, directly to you. So the you will become I if you don't have any other information, because you is always directly to the person that is being said to. All right. So if you don't have any other information about it, then normally it's going to become I. All right. So when you report it, we're going to go again with he asked. All right. He asked. And mind you, like I said, if you want to clarify that they're asking you and then asking someone else, so we can also certify the fact that the you will become I. You can go, he asked me. As I mentioned before, you can say, he asked me. And like we said before, do is non-existent in the statement, but it shows up in the answer. All right. Now, in this case, we're going to put in a conditional, okay, because that's the type of question it is, Do you like living in Egypt? So he wants to know if I like living in Egypt, right? So that's one way to do that. And again, like I said, you becomes I. All right. So he asked me if I like, okay, and this, we're going to change it, like we said, like is what? Present tense. So in the question, it's going to become past. That's the normal pattern. All right. We're going to go like that. Okay. So remember that the present tense goes to the past tense, present simple to past simple. All right. So he asked me if I liked living in Egypt. Okay, so remember that, all right, that's what's going to happen here. All right. Now he asked me if I liked living in Egypt. See, this is the way you have to do that, because you can't say he asked me I liked living in Egypt. You see, that doesn't convey the meaning. So you have to put in if in there, because of course, the answer could be yes or no. So remember, if the answer could be yes or no, then we don't know which one it is. So we're going to use if, okay, because we don't know if the question here, if it can be yes or no, then you need if there. All right, do you like living in Egypt? You might say, no, I don't like living in Egypt. You might say, yes, I like living in Egypt. So here it can be yes or no. So you're going to go, he asked me if I liked living in Egypt. Okay, so remember that. That's a very important point to remember there. Okay. All right, and let me just give you a little more information here. If the question was one requiring yes or no, and a yes or no answer, then the word if is used in reporting that question. All right, so that's just what I was telling you a few seconds ago. All right. Okay, I'm not sure how much time we have so far, but I don't want this to go too long. All right. The next part, that's reported questions, but the next part we have reported commands. So I'm going to separate the video from reported questions and reported commands. Okay, I'm going to separate those. So the next video will be about reported commands. And we just got finished dealing with reported questions. All right, so it's reported speech. All of it is under the heading of reported speech, but we're talking about reported questions. What type of reported speech? Reported questions. So the next video, we're going to talk about reported commands, also reported speech, but reported commands. Okay. All right. So for your homework, I want you to write some examples. Okay. Of this. Okay. From what you learned today. Now, of course, in the next lessons, you're going to see that there are more possibilities. Of course, you need to know, well, in this case, it's present simple, but what if the question is past simple? What if the question is present perfect? Okay, so when the tense changes, also the reported speech will change as well. So we're not going to deal with that today, but just do your homework with using the present simple. And later we'll be talking about what happens when it's a different tense. So make sure your sentences are using the present simple. Okay, enjoy your day. And if this is a video because you missed a class, then when you come to class, I'll check your homework. If you are taking this online, then send me your homework and I'll check it and send it back to you, whether it's by email or on Facebook Messenger. Okay, but nonetheless, you have to do your homework and then I will check it. Okay, what else here? Okay, okay. Oh, yeah. I wanted to say for those who are watching this video because they missed their class, well, don't forget, it's important to come to class because you actually get practice speaking in class. All right. So getting practice speaking is very beneficial. Learning a lesson is fine, but actually practicing what you learned is very important. All right, so when you come to class, we talk together and I correct you when you make mistakes when you're talking. That's also a benefit over having a friend that speaks English and you talk with them because they're not a teacher. So, one, they may not know everything that you're saying, grammatically, if it's correct or not. And two, because they understand what you're trying to say, they may not stop you. But a teacher, it is my job to correct you when you make a mistake and to teach you why it's wrong and to help you to not make that mistake again and to give you homework that will help you with that and other exercises. So don't underestimate the value of coming to class. Okay, so try to come to your next class so you can get that benefit as well. All right, enjoy your day and I'll see you next class.